Hey everyone, welcome back to Mindful Morsels by Sam H. Lee. Today I want to talk about what happens when the productivity system doesn't work. I think that as a Notion creator, Notion is a productivity app that's available both on desktop and mobile. It's really easy to come at this from the other side, right? Of all the times Notion has helped me, which it has, but as just a human, it definitely feels like sometimes you are working with something that is not, for whatever reason, compatible with what is currently going on. And I do think there are very valid critiques of Notion. I think I have definitely seen my fair share of people commenting on YouTube videos, or even the people who are real enough with me to just tell me to my face. I think there are common critiques of saying people who use Notion spend more time making their Notion pretty and aesthetic instead of being productive. Notion doesn't work. That's another one I've heard. And also along the lines of Notion is fake productivity. It's not real productivity. Again, getting back to that idea that you're spending more time just creating a system to create a system and not actually to get things done. And I think from a personal standpoint, I definitely can sympathize and even empathize with some of that. I have had my fair share of ups and downs with Notion. I would say that the first time I downloaded Notion was August 2020. I had just started virtual college because it was the pandemic, and I didn't find it useful at first. I tried to get a sense of the pages and databases and ways you could just build your information systems in Notion. I looked at the website, I looked at forums, but for me, I just couldn't really get into it and I stopped. I went back to my Google Docs, I went back to my Google Slides, anything Google. I went to a school that primarily used Google for most of the collaborative stuff, at least. And I didn't use Notion for that first semester. I picked it back up because I think a key value add that Notion has is that when you feel like you are making an important transition, either physically or also like in the geographical sense, or also even like work wise, where you're suddenly like doing a lot more or doing a lot less, Notion's really good about kind of getting a temperature check. So in the spring of my freshman year, I moved out of my home in Cleveland and came to the DC area. And that was a big shift. Not only was COVID still a big deal, but it was a completely different environment to still be doing virtual school and meeting people. So because of that, I think it made sense to have something like Notion. And since then, again, it has not been a continuous process of using Notion. I cannot swear by it. I can't say that I have used Notion every day, even most days since then. That being said, I think the larger point here, besides me admitting that even though I do love Notion and I use it a lot, it just represents the idea that Notion is a system that can't ever fully reflect life. Life is chaotic, life is messy. You cannot plan for every scenario. It's simply impossible. And I used to think that there was no wrong way to use Notion, but now, after learning a bit, I want to modify that and say that I think there are a few wrong ways to use Notion. And it's not just like lack of experience or knowledge on how to use the actual software. It's if you expect Notion to replace what you need to do for yourself, which is think and make decisions. I think that now when I see these really elaborate data systems that I have created or I see other creators create, as long as that works for them, great. But I find it really hard for a lot of people who might want to just use Notion more casually than me and others to embrace something that can seem so daunting and also as if it's supposed to think for you. I really don't think Notion can do that because, again, like your life is your life. You are making the decisions that you want to make. So, what does that mean? For me, recently, I wasn't feeling well. I was quite sick, and I was just operating at, let's say, like minimum capacity, like doing what I could every day, trying to prioritize what needed to be done, and then sleeping pretty much and feeling better the next day. And I was not using Notion as much as I had been. And that meant like not journaling as much in Notion, not using it to track as many of my expenses, at least in the moment, and not using it even for the content creation either, because content creation was definitely taking a back burner. And I want to make this distinction here that maybe even a year ago, I would have been really stressed about that. Like, when you're stressed about everything you aren't doing, I hope that is a relatable feeling, because if it's not, that is concerning for me. But I think even a year ago, like in that scenario, I would have been like extending the time it took for me to recover, because I would be so stressed that I wasn't journaling every day in my Notion or whatever tool. I wasn't recording every expense when it happened. But that wasn't important. Like, what was important was that I was focused on getting better, and I was prioritizing other things that needed to be prioritized, including like things at work, for example. And I honestly just did not care. I did not care this time around that like I missed a few days of my Notion journaling. I did not care that I was not using my Notion system to its optimal peak. And I think that's a real feeling, because I have felt that way in the past, where I don't feel like I am using my Notion well enough, quote unquote. And I think a lot of people can relate to that. So what's the lesson? I think that a system just needs to work well enough. Anyone saying there is a perfect life system, I think, has a really, really hard job to uphold that. And I don't envy them, and I also don't quite believe them. I'm trying to give a little benefit of the doubt here, but I just really feel very disenchanted with the idea. And this is not just Notion. At this point, it's more of like general productivity landscape, at least the way I have experienced it so far, where I just don't think there's ever going to be a system that can fully define your life. And I think even though a lot of people are aware of it, that's still something we strive for. Versus, I think a system just needs to be good enough. And if you are focused more on perfecting a system versus what I would argue are more important things, like maybe developing your relationships or working on your health or doing something that probably doesn't involve a computer screen, I think that is a harder sell for me, at least, because that is something I definitely used to prioritize more, about making a system as close to perfect. That doesn't mean I don't want to make a system better, but that's a key distinction between just trying to get better and having this like perfect goal in mind. So, I think we should ultimately view tools like Notion as just that. Tools. It's not your life, it's not the system you need to swear by, but it's just a helpful tool in certain seasons of your life that could help you get things done, whether that's in a professional sense, a personal sense, a creative sense, all three at once. I think I have realized that a lot of productivity systems that I've internalized aren't things to like really pay attention to. That doesn't mean that productivity systems don't have their place, but I think a big learning thing for me this past year has been the idea of making productivity knowledge work for me and not the other way around. Like, I think I'm past the phase of just like subscribing to everything, like 7 highly effective habits or whatever it's called, atomic habits, the 2-minute rule. Like, there are so many things that I think in principle, yes, are helpful, but should not be taken super, super seriously. Coming from someone who used to take it super, super seriously. Let me know if you have any thoughts on this as well, either in the comment section, or I could be reached on major social media platforms at Sam H. Lee. But yeah, I just think that this is a necessary point to the productivity conversation. And I will add that once I was feeling better, I just went back to doing things in Notion, like the journaling, the tracking, putting down my thoughts, and not feeling guilty at all about missing a few days that ultimately seemed very inconsequential in terms of missing them on Notion. Yeah, let me know your thoughts. Thanks so much for listening to this episode of Mindful Morsels by Sam H. Lee. I hope you found some Notion tip, budgeting advice, or other insight helpful to make your life slightly less stressful. If you want to see or hear more of Mindful Morsels, feel free to like and subscribe on Substack, where you can find me by searching Mindful Morsels by Sam H. Lee, and also on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. If you'd like to have some input on episode ideas, feel free to vote in polls I put out on my YouTube channel, and that handle is Sam H. Lee. Until next time, I'll see you then.